The sea was black as ink, the wind a howling beast, and the Dutch fleet lay helpless on a frozen horizon that would not melt for months. It is the summer of 1663, and a dozen hulks from the Amsterdam chamber of the VOC have just slipped through the narrow straits of the Davis Strait, their hulls groaning under the weight of thousands of barrels of blubber. The men on board, seasoned harpooners, young apprentices, and a handful of merchants hoping to cash in on the lucrative market for whale oil, believe they have outrun the worst of the Arctic. The ice they see ahead is a distant shimmer, a warning they expect to pass like a cloud. But the Arctic does not forgive optimism. By early September, a sudden shift in the polar vortex forces the wind southward, driving a wall of pack ice across the narrow passage. The Dutch ships, built for speed and cargo, find their rudders caught in a lattice of frozen seaweed and ice floes. Within days the fleet is immobilized, the sails furled, and the crew forced to abandon the open decks for the cramped, damp holds where the stored blubber begins to emit a sour, rancid smell. Beat 1, the initial scramble. The captains, aware that a winter in the Arctic could mean starvation, order the crews to offload as much whale oil as possible onto the ice itself, hoping to melt it later and preserve the cargo. Men work in layers of wool and oilcloth, their breath forming clouds in the bitter air. The cold bites through even the thickest coats, the sound of cracking ice becomes a metronome to their frantic labor. A young harpooner, barely out of his teens, remembers the taste of sea spray and now feels the sting of frozen water on his tongue. The men carve shallow trenches in the ice, pouring oil into them like a desperate offering to a hostile god. Beat 2, the winter settles. By November, the sun hovers low on the horizon, casting long, blue shadows across the ice. The fleet is now a frozen graveyard of timber and canvas. Supplies run low. The men are forced to turn to the dwindling stores of dried peas, salted cod, and the occasional biscuit. Hunger gnaws at them, and morale frays. Yet the whalers are not idle. They fashion makeshift sledges from broken oars, dragging heavy blocks of ice back to the ships to use as insulation. They hunt the few seals that venture onto the ice, their blood providing a brief warmth that spreads through the cramped cabins. Beat 3, the desperate gamble. In January, word reaches the fleet from a passing Dutch vessel that the ice north of Spitsbergen has begun to crack, a sign that spring may be near. The captains decide to risk a breakout. They will cut a narrow channel through the ice using hand-driven iron saws and the combined strength of every man. For weeks they labor, their faces blackened with soot from the fires they keep burning to stay warm. The ice groans, splinters, and sometimes collapses, sending men tumbling into frigid water. One of the older sailors, whose skin is weathered by countless voyages, remarks that the ocean itself seems to resist their effort, as if the Arctic is holding them hostage. Turn A hidden ledger. While carving a passage, a crew member discovers a small, waterlogged chest lodged in a crevice of the ice. Inside is a weather-worn logbook belonging to a Dutch whaling expedition from the early 1620s. The entries speak of a similar winter, but also of a hidden inlet where the ice never fully closed, a natural harbor known only to a handful of veteran hunters. The logbook notes that a small fleet, using this inlet, escaped the worst of the freeze and returned to Amsterdam with their cargo intact. The revelation forces the captains to reconsider their strategy. Instead of forcing a break through the main pack, they could attempt a risky detour toward the rumored inlet, hoping the old knowledge still applies. Beat 4, or the final push. Armed with this new, albeit uncertain, information, the fleet splits. A smaller group of ships, led by a captain known for his cautious judgment, veers eastward, navigating through a maze of icebergs and thin, translucent sheets of ice. The larger ships stay behind, attempting the original channel. The tension aboard the smaller vessels is palpable, every crack of ice sounds like a gunshot. The men watch the horizon for any sign of open water, their eyes straining in the dim polar light. After days of near-constant danger, a thin ribbon of water appears, widening just enough for a single hull to slip through. The crew erupts in a guttural cheer that echoes across the silent ice. Beat 5, the aftermath. The smaller fleet, though battered, reaches the open sea in early March. The sun, now higher, begins to melt the surrounding ice, turning the water into a glittering expanse. The surviving whalers return to Amsterdam months later, their ships carrying a fraction of the original cargo but a story that spreads through the merchant houses like wildfire. Their accounts spark a debate among the Dutch East India Company's directors: should the lucrative but perilous Arctic whaling routes be abandoned, or should they invest in sturdier ships and better winter provisions? The answer never comes cleanly. The industry continues, but with a newfound respect for the Arctic's capriciousness. The haunting question that lingers on the frozen coast is whether the hidden inlet described in the old logbook truly existed, or whether it was a sailor's hopeful myth. Modern archaeologists have scoured the Arctic for remnants of 17th century Dutch hulls, yet the definitive proof remains elusive. Some argue that the inlet was a seasonal meltwater channel, gone long before any modern expedition could locate it. Others suggest that the very act of searching for it keeps the memory of those trapped whalers alive, a reminder that even the most prosperous age can be humbled by nature's indifferent force. The ice still moves, the wind still howls, and the ghosts of the Dutch fleet wait, perhaps, for a thaw that may never come.